So here we are at Eastleigh Farm. Really looking forward to meeting Heather and finding out a little bit more about what she does down here. Let's go. Excellent. I've been really looking forward to this interview.
Yeah, me too.
Fantastic. Right, basically, a whistle-stop tour to your introduction to riding. I mean, I know you started riding as a child, but what were your experiences?
Basically, my father had a small pony when I was very young that he used to drive in a trap, and I showed no interest whatsoever. I was very musical, and I was sent to a music school, which happened to pass a friend's riding school. And so, of course, I stopped off to talk to all the ponies, and then he came out one day and said, "Would you like a ride?" That was it. So I had to fight a little bit with my parents for some time because I was actually quite talented, and music-wise, that is piano. And so later, my father relented and bought me my first horse when I was 13, a Welsh cob mare called Cider. And then after that, because he'd ridden as a child as well, he decided to get a couple of hunters, and we actually had another horse that was a good show jumper as well. So, and we had a groom at the time as well. And so it all sort of became that we ended up with more horses. By the time I was, I think, 17, I think I'd got about 5. But I'd also started teaching a friend's child because we had a little pony that I got, and I can't even remember now how I ended up with him, a little Welsh pony. And I started teaching a friend's daughter to ride. And I realised that I was able to teach very quickly, even though I'd never ever taught anything before. And I'd been, as a young teenager, I'd seen Nuno Oliveira ride at the Horse of the Year show when I was 13, and I knew that was how I wanted to ride, a great Portuguese trainer. But nobody could teach me to ride like that. And so as soon as I had my own horse, I started to experiment with different ways of trying to absorb the movement. And I remember actually we're mucking about in a friend's race exercise saddle with stirrups up like Lester Piggott, and all of a sudden I realised that I was sitting much more glued to the saddle. And I used to look at cowboy films and think, I don't know, they're going over this very rough terrain and yet they seem to be quite glued to the saddle. What were they doing that I wasn't? And I suddenly thought that's probably what they were doing. So I went back to the stables, got a normal saddle and went off again, and realised that I was synchronising my movement. I was so much more with the horse. I don't think at the time I'd fully evaluated what I was doing. That came much later, really, but I used to talk about the flexion of the lower back, so that you were flexing and straightening your back in time with the rhythm of the trot or the canter as such. And it wasn't until later on I discovered this movement that was actually the pelvis moving forward and back and up and down the seat bones. But I was actually doing it, but I hadn't realised I was doing it. So that was all part of the further evaluation. And then I used to think so often that, gosh, if only I had a machine that would replicate the movement of the horse, even at 15 or 16 years old, I would be able to teach people so much quicker. And I used to run alongside a small child and be working the back with my hand to get the back to flex in the right way. And I used to think, gosh, if this pony was actually still, but it was still moving, if you know what I mean. Couldn't find anything or anybody that actually made these machines. And so it took me 27 years in total to get these ones made, for instance. And it made a huge difference to the way that I could teach and to further evaluate the precise movements of the lower back and pelvis. So that's how I
teach something that's a dynamic movement in a static environment.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And so that was really how I started off. And I have to say that I went to do my British Horse Society exams. So at the time, I think things were a lot better than they are now, but even then I was not allowed to show this use of the lower back and the pelvis, which I knew was the secret to absorbing and synchronising the movement. And for me, the most important thing I could do was teaching a beginner was to teach them how to stay on. And so I told them to stuff the exams, basically. And I was told, you'll never make a career outside the British Horse Society. And so I then got married and moved to Northern Ireland and was there for 3 years, but moved back to England. And my late husband was actually a Formula 3 racing driver. but he joined me in the equestrian business, and we started a riding school. And, you know, from then on, we had a big indoor school, etc. So I was able to further sort of evaluate what I was doing. And then in my early 20s, I came across Captain Desi Laurent down here in Devon. So I was up on the Essex-Suffolk borders then. My parents had moved down here. And I went to see Desi, who'd been trained by Nuno Oliveira. And from then on, it was very much a different way of teaching and riding. It was what I'd always wanted to learn from Nuno Oliveira. I was able to learn from Desi. And so that's how I sort of got into it all. But I used to show jump in my younger days as well. And, you know, my teens and early 20s, it was very much, because I couldn't find what I wanted in the dressage world, it was still very much about, you know, sort of jumping fences. And so I've had a fairly sort of eclectic background as such. And that's really how it all started.
What was it about classical, but French classical in particular, that really
I didn't know
you?
there were any other types of classical. I mean, I saw the Cadre Noir at the not Horse of the Year show. They had up at the Wembley Empire Pool. Saw the Spanish riding school and loved these dancing horses. But then when I saw Oliveira, there was something more about him. There was this incredible lightness. And having I'm also very artistic, you know, I've sort of used to paint watercolours and had several solo exhibitions and things. There's a lot of botanical illustration, things like that. And I suppose I was looking at it from an artistic point of view. And for me, there was this ultimate lightness there, that for me, that was how I wanted to ride. I didn't want to ride with the horse permanently pressed up against the bit. You know, there was something there that made me want to find something else. And Desi Laurent, he was Belgian. He basically a Sabina airline pilot, but then when he retired, he went to train. Well, he was training with Oliveira as and when he could, but he did a lot more. And he was an absolute old devil. I mean, he probably actually ruined more careers than he had hot dinners. If you could put up with him, which I could, because I'd give him back as good as he gave me, then nobody else I know could have refined the aids in the way that he did. And so, he's long dead, but I've always given him credit for it, because I'm certain I wouldn't have learned nearly as much from my subsequent trainers, who were not good rider trainers, great horse trainers, but not good rider trainers. And I know I wouldn't have learnt anywhere near as much if I hadn't had Desi's input first. So wherever he is now, no, probably down there actually, thinking of Desi, I'm very, very grateful to him for what he taught me. So
I suppose in terms of instruction, many people might consider you a little bit of a maverick.
Oh, yeah.
It's not a bad thing. Do you consider that you do things differently, or that you go back to the roots and do things how they should be done?
For me, you know, we have 4 levels in the Enlightened Equitation teacher training, and even though a friend of mine from Holland actually is a very, very good classical trainer who's trained horses very high level, and he was talking about potentially doing the training, and I said to him, no, you would have to do level 1 first, because that for me is the basis of everything. It's about absolutely finding and selecting any sort of minute faults in the rider and correcting them, and having that ability to observe and correct is so important, because then once you've got the rider correct, any good horse trainer should be able to take them on to be able to train the horses afterwards. So for me, our level 1 is the most important of all, and for me beginners are the most important people of all. They're often only relegated to working students or the very lowest of the low, whereas they are actually the most important. You get the foundations right and the basics put right, then you can go on and do whatever you want. So that, you know, is very important. So, yeah.
So what would you say would be the mission statement of Enlightened Equitation?
Well, I suppose I like to use the quote I've got on the homepage of the website from Indian guru Prem Rawat. Simplicity is the key to understanding. And that's what it's all about. It's about finding maybe one fault that's setting off a whole chain reaction of other faults and isolating that and correcting it. And that for me is probably also my mission statement, as well as, well, I suppose it's not a mission statement as such, but, you know, it produces the results that I want, you know, because you're looking to find a very simple way. You know, for instance, I use an equation that you've got 2 halves to your backside, horse has got 2 halves to his back, put 2 and 2 together in sync, you make 1. You know, and it's that sort of thing that's very simple. Put 2 and 2 together out of sync, you make a mess. And so, but most people, you know, they're not taught how to synchronise their movement. It's sit deeper, relax your lower back, go with the movement, follow the movement. All of that sort of thing is so nebulous to, you know, to novice riders. What does that mean? And, you know, if you went to learn to play golf, for instance, you wouldn't just be told, well, here's a club, there's the ball, hit it. You would be told precisely what to do in order to make your golf swing and hitting the ball the best possible. And I feel that the riding industry is very much let down by the lack of quality of teaching and the depth of teaching. Now, I do strongly believe that the British Horse Society is needed. I'm education officer for South Devon. I'm a past county chairman, which I never thought that would ever happen. But I believe that you have to fight from within to make change. And, I do think that we need a good, strong equestrian body in this country. But I do feel, and I've said it for over 20 years, that there needs to be complete reform in the way that people are taught. And that way they would achieve so much more. Also, it's a big safety thing too, because if you teach people to stay on, there's a lot less litigation going on with people suing riding schools for coming off horses. So there's a big thing, because we found, when I had our own schoolmaster horses here as well, and we were taking people as far up as to Prix Saint Georges, we had a big schoolmaster. And I remember the NFU asking me to go up to the headquarters to lecture a couple of the underwriters and a couple of the directors, because when they looked in my accident book, in 10 years, I had 2 falls. And I mean, that's something in a riding school, you have that sometimes in a day. Yeah, and even one of those, the rider actually landed on the kicking boards, which, she just sat there like Humpty Dumpty in fits of laughter, so she hadn't even hit the floor. So, for me, it's very much about safety and health and safety these days, of course, is very, very much a moot point in any sport. So,
absolutely. I mean, there are lots of books and DVDs and online resources that people can access now in order to gain varying degrees of information on pretty much every subject. And there are lots of people that do claim to kind of crack the code for riding, but they come up with this nonsensical kind of jargon.
Some of this stuff.
Our industry has enough of nonsensical terms, and it's, I know jargon is necessary for the initiated to understand. Yeah. However, how do you feel about this? I mean, you don't do it.
No, I don't.
Everything is nice and
for
simple
me,
and clear.
it's, when I've got somebody on the horse, I want to be able to spot something that's going to happen and correct it before it even happens, so that they have a correction when they need it. Not some, that's the only thing I have
to
about.
Decipher what you mean.
Exactly. And, I had to laugh because there was a thread, somebody had asked about how to improve her sitting to the canter on another Facebook group last week, and my goodness, the number of comments that came in. And it was, instead of, as you would see on any videos that I've got on YouTube, for instance, about the canter, we talk about the backward ellipse of the pelvis, or the circle of the pelvis. And the one was saying, you need to actually practice with a hula hoop, because that's the movement you make on a horse.
Really?
So you actually hula hoop in canter. Another one had said that you've got to imagine you're dancing with a dancing partner, and the dancing partner is leading. Another one, of course, saying polish the saddle, and that, I mean, it was just so many. And that poor woman, I thought, my goodness, she must be so confused. So I sent her the clip of me working with the canter simulator there. And also one from the demonstration that you came to watch when I was demonstrating the canter on Ray. And so she wrote back to me a couple of days ago and said, "Oh, thank you." She said that so helped. I was getting so confused. And it really is not rocket science. It is so simple. It's not always that simple to put it into practice, because a lot of, for instance, riding school horses or privately owned horses are often poorly schooled. And if then, it's very different having a horse like Ray, for instance, for my students to learn on, who will go straight from halt to canter, rein back to canter, or what have you. Most little kids, particularly on small ponies, the liver's mixed up by the kidneys by the time they get from trot to canter, because, they're not schooled to actually work correctly. And, it's kick to go, pull to stop, pull to turn left, pull to turn right. Nobody can learn any finesse in their riding.
Absolutely.
And when I had my riding school years ago back in Essex, even the little 12-2 ponies were schooled under small teenagers, and they would go walk to canter, for instance. It made such a difference the way the children rode. And now, of course, there's a lot more emphasis too on in-hand work. A lot more people are getting interested in handwork. If only they would do that with the little ponies, it would make a huge difference to how the children ride, and instead of this pony club kick, if in doubt, clout. And so for me, it's all about humane treatment of the horse as well. riding correctly, you're going to do as little damage as damage limitation, basically. And if you're kicking and thumping the horse, you're stopping it from going forwards. And then the horse gets the blame.
Okay, so Enlightened Equitation is a really well-established institution. So where would you ideally like to see the future? Kind of what would be your goals?
Well, if I was a lot younger and I actually won the lottery, I would love to have had a centre of excellence, probably more up in the Midlands, whereby you've got really good, well-schooled horses, where you could actually teach the teachers to ride on them and really get that absolute perfection in the seat and the way that the aids are used, etc. And I sometimes think that maybe the title Enlightened Equitation sounds a bit highfalutin, but it came from my very first ever series of articles that I did for the Old Riding magazine years ago. And it was funny because I just I hadn't even thought of a title for the series, and the editor rang me up and said, what do you want to call the series? And without even thinking, I said Enlightened Equitation, and it just sort of came out from nowhere. And it was quite funny actually, because I was actually staying with some friends then up in Herefordshire and horsey friends, and we went into Abergavenny the day after, and it was a bank holiday, and it was friends had actually asked me the night before, what are you intending, to do, why have you written this series Enlightened Equitation? And I said to open people's eyes to a better way of riding. And as we were walking through Abergavenny, out from the side, little side sort of alleyway, this tiny little Welsh gypsy lady, and she tugged at my sleeve and she looked up at me and she said, "You're going to open the eyes of many people, my dear." And it was so funny because that series was so popular. And then my old book, Enlightened Equitation, sold over 60,000 copies. So, I think, I have opened quite a few eyes. And the only thing is I only got 40 pence royalty for it, so I didn't exactly make a fortune out of an £18.99 book. But, for me now, as I'm sort of, I'm basically an old age pensioner, I have no intention of retiring there because I'd be bored stiff apart from anything else. But I think Enlightened Equitation, I will probably look at handing over the reins ultimately. I'd like it to go on. And possibly, I don't know whether Omar Rabia, my friend who wrote the book Cobbs Can, who's on one of our level 4s, he would definitely be a case in point. He's got a riding school up in Cumbria now. Well, I say a riding school, it's a training centre. And I would like to see, if we had the funds, I know what we can do with beginner riders, with improving riders, who've got long established faults. If I had a £5 note for every time somebody said, so nobody's told me that before, I would have won the lottery basically. But it's having the funding. This is not a business whereby you make a lot of money, as you know. And if you're buying and selling top class dressage horses, yes, you can make a very nice living. But when you're teaching the general public and not working at high levels and buying and selling horses, it's not an easy business to make money. So, you can't have the facilities and the sort of things unless you've got a big backer or something like that, which is what, I would love to have had. But, if we're training more and more instructors, Enlightened Equitation teachers, and they get such good results. It's really good, when you see that, and we get the feedback from people who are having lessons with them, and they say, "Oh, it's just such a breath of fresh air. I've learnt more in 2 lessons than I've learned in 10 years." It does improve the sort of feeling of achievement, and but I just wish I was 10 years younger and still had a bit more freedom and a lot more money, and then we could really do something. But well, you're a lot younger than me, so we'll carry on, hopefully, pushing you on to do more with ex-race horses and other breeds of horses too. Like,
Absolutely.
One of the horses that I've been working with recently is Midge, the big Clydesdale from Adventure Clydesdales up on Dartmoor. And everybody loves him. They go potty every time they see him. We put photographs up on Facebook and he gets hundreds of likes, People don't assume they can do it. So it's nice just to have, it's the same with Omar with Cobbs Can. I mean, that mare on the front of his book that over there behind us, she cost him £800 and she does all the Grand Prix movements, bar one-time changes. So it just shows that, Cobbs can, ex-racehorses can, Clydesdales can, and it's the way they're trained and the way people ride them.
Well, what you have achieved with basically starting from nothing and trying to bring a new idea to the public has been fantastic. I mean, you are a successful published author. You are an international trainer. You have the respect of anybody that reads your stuff, you know, and that in itself is a huge accolade.
Oh, I think
Especially in this day
there's
and
quite a
age.
few out there who don't respect me
Well,
still.
and that's not a bad thing, you know. That's a good thing, you know, because it means that you're
You
not
develop
just
a
going
very,
with the flow.
very tough hide, take it from me,
Yeah,
you
no,
know.
absolutely. But you know, you take credit from that. What you've done has been great.
And, you know, for me, it's not about being well known or anything. It's purely, partly trying to get a voice for the horse, and
Sure.
also surviving down here in the deepest, darkest Devon.
You still have an enthusiasm for your work.
Oh yeah,
And that's-
absolutely.
and that
You know,
is-
I've been
that's
teaching
evident.
45 years, and you know, the day I lose that enthusiasm would be the day I'd give up, literally, because you always somebody will always teach you something new, and you know, you just can't believe. Sometimes you think, why haven't I thought of that before? And you know, it just all adds then to the depth of the teaching, but still maintaining that simplicity, which for me is absolutely paramount.
Well, one of my questions was going to be, are you still excited by what you do? I don't have to ask that, and I'm not going to, because I think it would be an insult. But I am so looking forward to seeing you work with the horses. I'm really looking forward.
Seriously looking forward to working with a couple of yours.
Absolutely,
So,
it's going to be great. But I would love to go and have a look at a couple of your guys now, especially Monty the ex-racer.
Oh yeah, Monty, of course.
If you want to jump
yeah.
on too, that would be super. So should we pop on down?
Yeah, we might as well.
I might
So
button
I
another
will
coat
just, I think I will just remove small puppy and take her, so we can perhaps walk on down there, and I'll hand her over to one of the girls.
Fantastic.